with, we just exceeded expectations. And so I think that's kind of where that pridefulness comes from, and everyone just continuing to show up and love each other and fight for each other and fight for the people that couldn't be out there. So yeah, I think proud is like the biggest sentiment following the season.
This offseason is very uncertain for the entire league in general, but you're a free agent for the first time. Have you thought about what free agency might look like for you?
Why did Lexie Hull, a player known for her relentless work ethic and deep loyalty, leave the WNBA in tears? And why are rumors pointing fingers not just at her team, but at Stephanie White, the head coach of an entirely different franchise? The truth behind Hull's shocking exit goes far beyond simple rivalry. It reveals a harsher, more unforgiving side of the WNBA that few talk about. The news hit like a thunderclap just as the new season was about to tip off. Lexie Hull, a former first-round pick and a symbol of grit and heart for the Indiana Fever, had been cut from the roster. Fans were stunned. This didn't feel like a routine roster adjustment, it felt personal. And the silence from the team's front office only fueled speculation. What really happened? Social media erupted with questions, outrage, and confusion. Supporters who had followed Hull's journey from day one, who had seen her dive for loose balls, train tirelessly, and lead with quiet strength, couldn't make sense of the decision. Hull wasn't just another name on a jersey. She embodied what the franchise claimed to stand for. Cutting her felt like cutting the soul out of the team. The timing made it even more painful. Training camp had just wrapped up. Hull had given everything, physically and emotionally, in the fight for her spot. She believed she'd made the cut. And then, just days before the season opener, came the call that ended it all. Her teammates were reportedly blindsided. Hull had been more than just a player. She was a locker room leader, a mentor, and a friend. Her sudden absence left a gaping hole in the team's chemistry. Some players took to social media with cryptic posts, hinting at internal turmoil, but stopping short of naming names or directly challenging the organization. The fear was palpable. If it could happen to Hull, it could happen to anyone. To understand Hull's departure, we have to look at the deeper dysfunction within the Indiana Fever. This is a franchise that has spent years adrift. Once crowned WNBA champions in 2012, they've since plummeted to the bottom of the league, plagued by poor performance, high turnover, and crumbling fan support. Media coverage has dried up. The buzz around the team, once electric, has vanished. Player development has been a persistent issue. Promising young talent came in year after year, but rarely blossomed. Fingers pointed in every direction. Bad coaching, bad front office decisions, and a toxic culture. Stories of miscommunication and internal disarray became harder to ignore. This was the reality Hull walked into as a rookie. And yet she stayed. She worked. She believed in the team. That's what makes her exit so painful and so telling. Hull's release wasn't just about stats. It was about a team trying to reinvent itself, and perhaps doing so at the cost of its very identity. Whether Stephanie White truly played a role, or whether her name is simply caught in the echo chamber of rumor, remains unclear. But what's undeniable is that Hull's story is part of a bigger, more unsettling pattern. In the modern WNBA, dedication isn't always enough. Loyalty doesn't always get rewarded. And behind the glamour of growth and expansion, there's a brutal side to the business that too often goes unspoken. Lexie Hull's journey is a reminder. In a league where every spot is a battle, sometimes the hardest working players are the ones who pay the highest price. Every draft pick mattered for the Indiana Fever. Years of underperformance had left the franchise with little margin for error. With few assets and fewer wins, each rookie wasn't just a player. They were a symbol of hope, a possible cornerstone for a long-awaited rebuild. But hope doesn't win games. And the pressure on young players to deliver immediately was overwhelming. Everything changed the moment the Fever won the WNBA draft lottery. Caitlin Clark, the most electrifying name in women's basketball, was headed to Indiana. She wasn't just a player, she was a phenomenon. Her impact at the University of Iowa had been seismic. She broke viewership records, blurred the lines between men's and women's sports, and turned every game she played into a must-watch event. Her range, her swagger, her no-look passes. She became a lightning rod for attention, admiration, and criticism alike. When she declared for the WNBA draft, it wasn't just a sports story. It was a cultural moment. And when Indiana landed the #1 pick, it felt like the franchise had finally caught a break. The arrival of Clark didn't just bring talent. It brought cameras, headlines, endorsements, and sky-high expectations. The Fever weren't just rebuilding anymore. They were on the clock. Suddenly, Indiana was the center of the basketball world. And with that spotlight came urgency. The Fever's front office understood that their window to build around Clark and win was limited. Every decision moving forward had to be strategic, calculated, and if necessary, ruthless. The developmental approach was tossed aside. This wasn't about slowly grooming young talent. It was about building a contender immediately. That meant no one spot was safe. Veterans and rising players alike found themselves under scrutiny. Roster spots became fiercely contested, and the old rules no longer applied. Loyalty, effort, even potential, none of it guaranteed survival. Only one thing mattered now. Could you help Caitlin Clark win games right now? Lexie Hull, despite her tireless work ethic and promise, became collateral damage in this new era. To understand her release, you have to understand the harsh economics of the WNBA. Unlike the NBA's deep pockets and expansive rosters, the WNBA operates under intense financial constraints. The salary cap is tight. Rosters are capped at just 12 players. There is no room for slow burns or sentimental favorites. Every slot must contribute immediately or be sacrificed. Teams can't afford to wait. They can't afford to hope someone pans out in a year or two. Hull, like many others, wasn't cut because she wasn't good enough. She was cut because the system doesn't allow patience. Not when the spotlight is this bright. Not when a generational star has just walked through the door. Clark's arrival didn't just change the game. It reshaped the Fever's identity and expectations overnight. And in that seismic shift, players like Lexie Hull, players who had done everything right, were suddenly in the wrong place at the wrong time. This isn't just a story about one player's heartbreak. It's a glimpse into the unforgiving structure of the WNBA. A league where talent meets tight budgets, and where even the most dedicated players can be left behind, not because they failed, but because they didn't fit into a championship timeline that demands results today. You're always one bad game, one injury, or one front office decision away from being out of a job. In the WNBA, there is no safety net, not even for first-round draft picks like Lexie Hull. Unlike their NBA counterparts, WNBA players don't enjoy long-term security. Promises made on draft night often evaporate the moment a roster spot becomes more valuable for someone else. You're gone, no matter your work ethic, no matter your potential. And the pressure isn't just about performance on the court. Financial realities shape every move a WNBA team makes. Many franchises still operate at a loss, relying heavily on support from NBA parent teams. Every roster decision is a business decision. Do you sell tickets? Do you draw media attention? Do you bring in sponsorships? If the answer is no, your spot becomes expendable. Enter Caitlin Clark. Her arrival changed everything for Indiana. She was a guaranteed moneymaker, tickets, headlines, endorsements. She shifted the Fever's calculus overnight. Suddenly, building a competitive team around her wasn't optional, it was urgent. Wasting her prime with a mediocre supporting cast wasn't an option. And in that scramble to maximize the moment, tough, even heartbreaking, decisions had to be made. Lexie Hull became one of them. Her story is the painful, all-too-common reality of chasing a dream in the WNBA. How could a player so dedicated, so respected, be cut, with tears in her eyes and no clear explanation? Why were there murmurs about Stephanie White, head coach of another team entirely? The truth goes deeper than any rivalry. It reveals the harsh new reality of a league, where dreams collide with cold calculations. The news of her release hit like a thunderclap, just as the season was set to begin. Lexie Hull, a former first-round pick, known for her relentless hustle and heart, was suddenly no longer part of the Indiana Fever. Fans were stunned. How could someone who had given so much to the team be dismissed so easily? This wasn't just another roster move. It felt personal, and the front office's silence only fueled speculation. Social media erupted in disbelief. Hull wasn't just a player. She embodied the Fever's grit and spirit. Her tireless work ethic, her leadership, her presence in the locker room, gone in an instant. The timing made it even more cruel. Training camp had just wrapped. Hull had pushed herself to the brink, believing she'd earned her spot. And then days before opening day, the call came, and everything changed. Her teammates were reportedly blindsided. Some saw her as more than a teammate. She was a mentor, a friend, and a cornerstone of team culture. Her departure created a void that couldn't be easily filled. Not in the lineup, not in the locker room. A few players posted vague, emotional messages online, careful not to say too much. But the fear among them was real. If Hull wasn't safe, who was? To understand what happened, you have to look at the bigger picture. The Fever's recent history is anything but stable. Once a championship-caliber team, Indiana had spent years lost in a cycle of coaching changes, failed rebuilds, and frustrated fans. This latest chapter, the cutting of a beloved player for reasons that feel more financial than basketball, is a harsh reminder of just how ruthless the modern WNBA can be. The Indiana Fever once had a championship pedigree, winning the WNBA title in 2012, but those glory days now felt like distant memories. In recent years, the franchise had become synonymous with underachievement. They finished at the bottom of the standings multiple times, attendance plummeted, and media coverage all but vanished. Nationally, the Fever were little more than an afterthought. Inside the organization, things weren't much better. Player development was inconsistent. Promising draft picks never seemed to reach their potential. Some blamed the coaching carousel, others pointed fingers at a front office that couldn't build a coherent roster. Whispers of dysfunction circulated, poor communication, a fractured culture, and an environment where players struggled to thrive. This was the setting Lexie Hull stepped into when she was drafted. In Indiana, every pick mattered. The team couldn't afford to swing and miss. They had no margin for error. Every young player carried the weight of the rebuild on their shoulders. The pressure to deliver, and deliver fast, was immense. Hope was never enough. Hope didn't win games. Then everything changed. The Fever won the draft lottery, and with it, the chance to select Caitlin Clark, a generational player who had already transformed the landscape of women's basketball. She wasn't just a talent, she was a cultural event. Her college games drew record-shattering viewership, her style of play was electric, and her name was already a brand. When Clark declared for the draft, the WNBA world held its breath. And when Indiana won the #1 pick, it felt like a miracle. But miracles come with pressure. Clark brought sponsors, cameras, headlines, and expectations that could suffocate an entire franchise. The Fever, long forgotten, were suddenly at the center of the basketball universe. And with that spotlight came a mandate: win now. Her arrival meant the timeline had accelerated. The Fever couldn't afford another slow rebuild. They couldn't afford to nurture potential. Every player had to prove their value, not just in talent, but in how well they complemented Clark. The front office knew the window to capitalize on her stardom was short. There was no room for sentimentality, no safety nets for veterans, and no grace period for young prospects. Every roster spot became a battleground. Moves came swiftly. Veterans were brought in, free agents signed, and the entire roster was reevaluated under a microscope. No one was safe. Players once viewed as part of the future were suddenly on the chopping block. This was the new reality in Indiana. Build a contender around Caitlin Clark, and do it fast, no matter who gets left behind. The equation in Indiana had changed. It was no longer about who had earned their spot, who had shown loyalty, or who had long-term potential. It was about who could help Caitlin Clark win right now. The Fever abandoned their slow-build approach in favor of immediate results. Development took a back seat to desperation. And Lexie Hull, despite her tireless work ethic and undeniable promise, became collateral damage. The harsh economics of the WNBA. To understand why players like Hull are cut, you need to understand the brutal economics of the WNBA. Unlike the NBA, which enjoys billion-dollar revenues and massive payrolls, the WNBA runs lean, very lean. The salary cap is a fraction of what NBA teams spend, and each team is limited to just 12 roster spots during the regular season. That's it. Every slot matters. There's no luxury of keeping projects on the bench to develop. No room for sentimental favorites. If you're not contributing immediately and significantly, your spot could go to someone who will. This financial pressure creates an environment of constant insecurity for players. In the WNBA, you're always one injury, one bad performance, or one front office decision away from being unemployed, even if you were a first-round draft pick like Hull. Promises made on draft night don't hold weight when the organization decides it needs your spot for someone else. And the pressure goes beyond the court. WNBA teams are still chasing profitability. Many operate at a loss, surviving through subsidies from their NBA affiliates. That means every decision is scrutinized through two lenses: basketball and business. Do you bring fans into the arena? Do you attract media attention? Can you land sponsorship deals? If the answer is no, your value, no matter how skilled or hardworking, drops dramatically. The Caitlin Clark effect. Caitlin Clark changed that entire calculus in Indiana. Her arrival meant ticket sales, media buzz, and brand deals before she even stepped on the court. She made the Fever relevant again overnight. But with that relevance came urgency. The team couldn't afford to waste her prime years surrounded by mediocrity. They had to build a contender, fast. That meant difficult, sometimes painful decisions. And Lexie Hull became one of the first casualties in this new era. The Stephanie White mystery, then came the rumors. Some fans, desperate for answers, started pointing fingers. One name kept surfacing, Stephanie White. But here's the twist. Stephanie White never coached Lexie Hull with the Fever. So why was her name being dragged into the conversation? Because she represents something larger. Stephanie White's connection to Indiana basketball runs deep. A standout at Purdue University, a former WNBA player, and later head coach of the Fever from 2015 to 2016, White had a reputation for demanding excellence. She led the Fever to the WNBA Finals in 2015, falling just short against the Minnesota Lynx. After her stint in Indiana, she coached at Vanderbilt before returning to the WNBA as head coach of the Connecticut Sun. But her no-nonsense, win-now coaching style still casts a long shadow over Indiana basketball. Some speculate that her influence, or at least her philosophy, still echoes within the Fever's front office. Others believe she symbolizes the league's shift toward a new era, one defined by tough decisions, tighter margins, and a relentless push for results. In truth, Stephanie White probably had little to do with Lexie Hull's release. But the fact that her name keeps coming up shows just how much the WNBA has changed and how few people were prepared for the emotional toll those changes would bring.